But the problem is they ran into the same old problems. Ran into the same old problems. And that's what we find in chapter 13. Nehemiah left for a while, and then he came back. He went back to Persia, and then came back to Jerusalem. And when he gets back, he finds that things have deteriorated. Chapter 13, look at verse 4. It says, "Now before this, Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God," remember where they're going to bring everything in and care for, that was given to the Lord, that was given to take care of the Levites and everybody else, bring it in and take care of it. It says he was allied with Tobiah. Tobiah was one of the leaders of the people of the land. And he had prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of King Art of Babylon, I had returned to the king. And then after certain days I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. And I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. So he gets back and he finds out that here this priest has thrown out all the things of God out of the storeroom and let this guy Tobiah have a room there. For what? I don't know. Whether, to stay when he was in Jerusalem, which would have been wrong because he was not a Jew, and to even be in the temple would be wrong. Or a place for him to keep his stuff because, hey, here's this temple. It's pretty solid. We can, protect it and so forth. We don't know. But he had aligned himself, for whatever reason, with the people of the land. Wait a minute. Didn't they say they weren't going to do that? This is not over generations. This is within the same generation. It's just a few years that Nehemiah had been gone. And he comes back and goes, "What are you doing?" And he kind of goes nuts, doesn't he? Can't you kind of see him going in the storeroom and just tossing stuff out like those, commercials of the woman who throws the couch and everything down on the guy's car? It's kind of that thing, out, get out of here. He's mad. He's real mad. A little bit like Jesus going in and overturning the money changers' tables in the temple, isn't it? He's going in, he's going to clean things up. What are you doing? You promised you weren't going to do this. But wait, there's more. Verse 10. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them. For the Levites and the singers who did work had gone back to the field. So I contended with the rulers and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their place. I set them in their place. That's what he's saying. And then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe and the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to him was Hannah, the son of Zaccur, the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this. Do not wipe out my good deeds that I've done for the house of my God and for its services. Yeah. They weren't paying the singers. They weren't paying the gatekeepers. And so the gatekeepers and the singers went back to work, got a job, and weren't singing and keeping the gates. Nehemiah sets that right. He takes care of things. But wait, there's more. Verse 15. In those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. And then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded the gates be shut, and I charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. No fishmongers are getting into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. And I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I'm going to lay my hands on you. And from that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and that they should go and guard the gates and sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. And so, though they had promised to keep holy the Sabbath, they weren't doing it. They weren't doing it. They promised, but something happened. And finally, take a look at verse 23. And in those days I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. And I contended with them. Get this. And I cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him who was beloved of his God, and who God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat, the Honorite. Therefore I drove him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan, and I assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service, and to bringing the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O God, for my good. Well, that's interesting, Pastor. So what? So what? We've been looking at how the rebuilding of Jerusalem is so much like the rebuilding of our own lives. And we too, when we come to the end of those rebuilding projects, we often make a covenant with God. And we say, I'm not going back there. I know it was back there. I'm staying here. I'm doing it. And then we start doing it. And we start doing it. And then our wings get tired. And then it seems like, well, if I just do a little bit of this. Well, if I just align myself with the world in this way, if I just make this one compromise, it'll be okay. And before we know it, we find ourselves right where we didn't want to be. The very things that the Jews covenanted, proclaimed a curse on themselves if they didn't fulfill it, those very things they found themselves in opposition to God for in no time at all. Didn't take them long at all. And I got to tell you, in my experience of life, doesn't take me long either. Doesn't take me long either. There's a quote that's become popular lately that is attributed to Einstein. But actually, I can't find anywhere where there's an actual quote by Einstein that he actually said this. And so other people are saying maybe it was Ben Franklin or somebody else. Whoever said it, it's a pretty good saying. And it goes something like this. The definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and again and expect different results. You see, we get into this cycle of rebuilding, and once we're rebuilt, we make that covenant, and I'm going to do it. And we find we can't do it. And we find ourselves compromising, and we find ourselves failing. And pretty soon there we are, back in the rebuilding effort, going, what? How did I end up like this? How did this happen? We become discouraged. We become frustrated. Maybe we become angry at God. Maybe we start to question God and say, well, what's up with this? Well, why am I in the same place?